The blood on her torn dress had dried dark as rust by the time Adelaide Sutherland realized she would die in these mountains if someone did not find her soon. Her father's rage-filled words still echoed through her mind as she stumbled through the California wilderness, each step sending fresh pain shooting through her battered body. He had called her wicked, called her a liar, called her things no father should ever say to his daughter, and then he had driven her 20 miles into the Sierra Nevada foothills and left her there with nothing but the clothes on her back and bruises blooming purple across her ribs. The year was 1878, and respectable women did not find themselves abandoned in the wilderness. But then again, respectable women did not refuse the marriage proposals of wealthy mine owners 3 times their age, and they certainly did not speak back when their fathers made such arrangements without their consent. Adelaide had been 19 for only 2 months when her father decided her fate. Thomas Sutherland owned the general store in Petaluma, and he had built his modest fortune through calculated decisions and ruthless efficiency. His daughter was simply another asset to be traded, and when she proved defiant, she became a liability. The beating had been bad enough, but the abandonment felt like murder by another name. He had driven the wagon far into the mountain passes where the spring snowmelt still fed rushing streams, and the pine trees grew so thick that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Then he had simply pointed away from the wagon and told her to walk. That had been yesterday morning, or perhaps the morning before. Adelaide had lost track of time as she wandered, trying to find any trail that might lead back to civilization. Her feet bled inside her thin shoes, and hunger gnawed at her stomach with increasing urgency. She had found a stream and drunk deeply, but water alone would not sustain her much longer. The nights grew cold at this elevation, even in late April, and she had spent the previous night shivering beneath a fallen log, certain that mountain lions or bears would find her before dawn. Now, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Adelaide's legs finally gave out. She collapsed against the rough bark of an enormous pine tree, her vision swimming with exhaustion and pain. Maybe this was her punishment for defying her father. Maybe God himself had deemed her too wicked to live, too stubborn to deserve mercy. The thought made her angry even through her despair, because she had only asked for the simple dignity of choosing her own husband, of not being sold to a man who already had 2 wives buried in the Petaluma cemetery. She must have lost consciousness because the next thing she knew, a shadow had fallen across her face, and a deep voice was speaking words she could not quite understand. Adelaide forced her eyes open and found herself staring up at a man who seemed to have stepped straight from the pages of a dime novel. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. A horse stood behind him, a beautiful bay gelding that watched her with intelligent dark eyes. "Can you hear me, miss?" the man asked, crouching down beside her. His voice carried a gentle concern that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "How long have you been out here?" Adelaide tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed only a rough croak. The man immediately reached for a canteen at his belt and held it to her lips, supporting her head with surprising gentleness as she drank. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. "Easy now," he said as she gulped desperately. "Not too fast or you will make yourself sick. There you go, just small sips." When she had drunk enough, he capped the canteen and studied her face with eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. His features were weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with several days of dark stubble covering his jaw. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "Are you hurt?" The kindness in his voice broke something inside Adelaide. Tears she had been holding back suddenly poured down her cheeks, and she found herself sobbing like a child. The man did not tell her to stop or look uncomfortable with her emotions. He simply waited, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. Finally, when she could speak, Adelaide said, "My father, he brought me here and left me." The man's expression darkened. "He left you out here in the mountains, alone?" Adelaide nodded, not trusting her voice. "How long ago?" "Yesterday morning, I think, maybe longer, I am not sure anymore." The man was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of anger that was clearly not directed at her. "Fathers do not do that. Whatever you did or did not do, whatever he thinks you did, fathers do not abandon their daughters in the wilderness to die." Something about his certainty, the absolute conviction in his words, made Adelaide cry harder. This stranger, this man who did not know her at all, had given her what her own father had refused, the basic acknowledgement that she deserved to live. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I need to get you somewhere safe, get some food into you. My camp is about an hour's ride from here." Adelaide tried to push herself up, but her legs shook too badly to support her weight. The man caught her before she could fall, his arms steady and strong. He studied her for a moment, clearly making a decision, then said, "I am going to lift you onto my horse." "Is that all right?" She nodded, and he scooped her up as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The world spun briefly, and then she was seated on the saddle, gripping the horn to keep from sliding off. The man swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to steady her. "My name is Caleb Winters," he said as he turned the horse back the way he had come. "I am a ranch hand from down near Paso Robles, driving a herd up to the railhead at Sacramento. What is your name?" "Adelaide Sutherland," she managed to say. "Well, Miss Sutherland, you are safe now, I promise you that." The ride passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Adelaide drifted in and out of awareness, vaguely conscious of Caleb's arm keeping her secure, of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, of the warmth of another human being after so many hours of cold isolation. She heard him talking to her occasionally, his voice low and soothing, though she could not focus enough to understand the words. When they finally reached his camp, the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Adelaide saw several other men moving around a campfire and heard the lowing of cattle somewhere nearby. Caleb called out to his companions, and suddenly there were multiple voices, all male, all concerned. She felt herself being lifted down from the horse, felt Caleb carrying her toward the fire. "Get some blankets," he ordered, "and heat up whatever stew is left. She needs food and warmth." Someone spread bedrolls near the fire, and Caleb set her down gently on the makeshift bed. An older man with a silver beard approached with a tin cup of something that smelled like beef and vegetables. Caleb took it from him and knelt beside Adelaide. "This is Charlie," he said, indicating the bearded man. "He is the best trail cook in California, even if his coffee could strip paint. You need to eat, Miss Sutherland. Can you manage it, or should I help you?" Adelaide's hands shook too badly to hold the cup, so Caleb fed her himself, spooning the lukewarm stew into her mouth with the patience of a man tending a sick child. The food sat heavy in her empty stomach, but she forced herself to swallow. After several bites, Caleb set the cup aside and wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders. The other men kept their distance, but she could feel them watching. There were 5 of them besides Caleb, all dressed in the rough clothing of working cowboys. They ranged in age from barely 20 to well past 50, and their faces held varying degrees of curiosity and concern. "Should we ride back to Petaluma?" one of them asked. "Get the sheriff." "Not tonight," Caleb said. "Miss Sutherland needs rest more than anything else right now. We will figure out what to do in the morning." The man nodded and returned to the fire. Caleb settled himself beside Adelaide, close enough that she could feel his presence but not so close as to crowd her. The night grew dark around them, and the other cowboys gradually drifted off to their own bedrolls, leaving only the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of the cattle. "You should try to sleep," Caleb said quietly. "You are safe here. I will keep watch." "You do not even know me," Adelaide whispered. "Why are you helping me?" "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one deserves what was done to you." Adelaide wanted to thank him, wanted to express the overwhelming gratitude that filled her chest, but exhaustion was pulling her down into darkness. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in 2 days, felt something close to safe. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and frightened, only to find Caleb still sitting nearby, keeping his promise. Once, she woke from a nightmare of her father's face twisted with rage, and Caleb was there immediately, his hand on her shoulder, his voice low and calm as he told her she was all right, that she was safe. The simple comfort of his presence soothed her back to sleep more effectively than any words could have. Morning came with the sound of men moving around the camp, preparing for the day's work. Adelaide opened her eyes to find pale sunlight filtering through the trees and the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, but it was nothing compared to the pain of the previous days. Caleb was sitting a few feet away, talking quietly with Charlie. He noticed her movement immediately and came over with a tin plate piled with food. "You need to eat," he said, offering her the plate. "We have a long day ahead of us." Adelaide accepted the plate, finding that her hands were steadier now. The bacon was crispy and salty, and the biscuits were heavy but filling. She ate slowly, aware of the cowboys packing up the camp around her. "Where are you going?" she asked Caleb. "We are driving the herd north," he said. "But first, I am taking you back to Petaluma. You need proper medical attention, and we need to have words with your father." Adelaide's stomach clenched with fear. "Please do not. He will only hurt me again." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He will not lay another hand on you, I promise you that. But you cannot just disappear, Miss Sutherland. You have a life, friends, perhaps possessions. You deserve the chance to reclaim what is yours." "I have nothing," Adelaide said bitterly. "Everything in that house belongs to him, and I have no friends, not really. He made sure of that. He controlled every aspect of my life, and when I finally said no to him, he threw me away like garbage." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What did you say no to?" Adelaide set down her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. "He arranged a marriage for me. To Harold Brennan, the man who owns the silver mine outside of town. Mr. Brennan is 57 years old, and his last 2 wives both died under suspicious circumstances. But he is wealthy, and my father saw an opportunity. When I refused, my father beat me and told me I had no choice. When I still refused, he drove me into the mountains and left me there." The muscles in Caleb's jaw worked as he processed this information. "Did you tell him that you had someone else? Someone you wanted to marry?" "No," Adelaide said. "There is no one else. I simply wanted the right to choose my own future. I wanted to marry for love, or not marry at all if that was my choice. But my father said I was foolish and ungrateful, that I did not understand how the world worked. He said I would thank him someday." "He said you would thank him for trying to kill you." Caleb's voice was flat with controlled anger. "He said I would thank him for making me wealthy," Adelaide corrected. "I do not think he meant to kill me. I think he meant to frighten me into submission." but the result would have been the same if you had not found me." Caleb stood abruptly and walked a few paces away, his hands on his hips. Adelaide watched him struggle with his emotions, watched him force himself to calm down. When he turned back to her, his expression was carefully neutral. "You have two choices, as I see it," he said. "We can take you back to Petaluma and you can tell the sheriff what happened. Your father would likely face charges, though I cannot promise justice would be served. Or you can come with us. We are headed to Sacramento, and from there you could go anywhere you wanted. Start a new life somewhere your father cannot find you." "I have no money," Adelaide said. "No skills that would help me survive on my own. What kind of life could I possibly build?" "I do not know," Caleb admitted. "But it would be yours. That has to count for something." Adelaide thought about this as she finished her breakfast. The idea of returning to Petaluma filled her with cold dread, but the idea of striking out on her own was equally terrifying. She knew nothing about the world beyond her father's house and his store. She had never earned wages or negotiated her own way. Everything she knew about survival had been taught to her in the context of serving a man, first her father, and then whatever husband he chose for her. But she also knew that she could not live that way anymore. Whatever happened next, she would rather die free than live as a possession. "I will come with you," she said finally. "If you will have me, at least until Sacramento. After that, I will figure something out." Caleb nodded slowly. "You can ride with me. But Miss Sutherland, you should know that we are a cattle drive. 6 men and about 200 head, and we will be on the trail for at least 2 weeks. It will be hard work and rough sleeping." "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I am sure," Adelaide said, and she meant it. The other cowboys seemed less certain. Charlie approached Caleb after breakfast and spoke in a low voice that Adelaide was clearly not meant to overhear, but she caught snatches of the conversation anyway. Words like improper and dangerous and what will people think drifted over to where she sat. Caleb's response was firm. "She comes with us. Anyone who has a problem with that can draw their pay and ride out now." No one did, though Adelaide could feel their skepticism. She could not blame them. A young woman traveling with 6 men would raise eyebrows at best and accusations at worst, but she had no other options, and Caleb had offered her this lifeline. She would not let it go. They broke camp within the hour, and Caleb lifted Adelaide back onto his horse. She protested that she could walk, that she did not want to be a burden, but he dismissed her concerns with a shake of his head. "You are in no condition to walk 20 miles a day," he said, "and we do not have a spare horse. You will ride with me until we reach Sacramento, and that is the end of it." So Adelaide found herself once again seated in front of Caleb on his bay gelding, his arm around her waist to keep her secure. The cattle drive moved slowly, the herd ambling north along an old trail that wound through the foothills. The other cowboys rode alongside the cattle, keeping them bunched together and moving in the right direction. Caleb stayed near the back, watching over everything with the practiced eye of someone who had done this many times before. As the morning wore on, Adelaide found herself relaxing against Caleb's chest. The rhythm of the horse was soothing, and the warmth of the sun felt good after the cold terror of the previous days. Caleb did not try to make conversation, seeming content to let her rest, but eventually Adelaide's curiosity got the better of her. "How long have you been a cowboy?" she asked. "Since I was 15, Caleb said. "My father had a small ranch down in Texas and I learned the trade from him. When he died, the bank took the land and I started hiring on with cattle drives. That was 8 years ago. Do you like it? The traveling, I mean." "Most of the time," he said. "It is hard work and the pay is not great, but I like being outside. I like working with horses and cattle, and I like the freedom of it, being able to move on when a place stops feeling right." Adelaide thought about this. "Do you ever think about settling down, having your own ranch again?" "Sometimes," Caleb admitted. "But land costs money, and I have been sending most of my wages back to my mother in Austin. She has 3 younger children to feed. Maybe someday, when they are all grown, I will save enough to buy a small spread somewhere." "That is kind of you," Adelaide said. "Taking care of your family like that," Caleb shrugged. "It is what family does. They look after each other." The implied criticism of her own father hung in the air between them. Adelaide felt a fresh wave of shame and anger, though she knew the shame was misplaced. She had done nothing wrong. Her father had failed her, not the other way around. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, and Adelaide helped Charlie prepare the meal, grateful to have something to do besides sit. Her body still ached, but the rest and food had restored some of her strength. Charlie was gruff but not unkind, and he seemed to soften toward her when he saw that she was willing to work. "Can you cook?" he asked as she sliced salt pork into a pan. "Some," Adelaide said. "My father never let me work in the store, so I spent most of my time managing the house. I can cook and clean and sew. Nothing very useful out here, I suppose." "Cooking is always useful," Charlie said. "Especially on a trail drive. These boys would live on jerky and hardtack if I was not around to feed them properly." After lunch, the drive continued. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed higher into the foothills, and Adelaide could see snow-capped peaks in the distance. The air was clean and pine-scented, and she found herself breathing deeply, as if trying to fill her lungs with freedom. That evening, they made camp in a meadow beside a river. The cattle spread out to graze, and the cowboys took turns keeping watch. Caleb helped Adelaide down from the horse and led her to a spot by the fire. "We need to talk about what happens when we reach Sacramento," he said as they sat down. "You will need money to start over, and I have some saved up. It is not much, but it might be enough to get you a room at a boarding house and tide you over until you can find work." "I cannot take your money," Adelaide protested. "You are already doing so much for me." "You can and you will," Caleb said firmly. "What kind of man would I be if I saved your life just to leave you destitute in a strange city?" "You would be a man who had done more than enough," Adelaide said. "Caleb, you owe me nothing. You found me by chance, and you have shown me more kindness than I knew existed, but I cannot take the money you have been saving for your family." Caleb studied her for a long moment, his gray-green eyes thoughtful. "You are a stubborn woman, Adelaide Sutherland." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the way he said it made her breath catch. "I have been told that before," she said quietly. "It is not a criticism," Caleb said. "Stubbornness can be a virtue, especially for someone in your situation. You will need that strength in the days ahead." Over the next week, a routine developed. Adelaide rode with Caleb during the day and helped Charlie with the cooking at night. The other cowboys gradually warmed to her presence, especially after she proved willing to work rather than expecting to be waited on. She learned their names and their stories. There was young Tommy, barely 20, who sent money home to his widowed mother. There was Jack, a former soldier who rarely spoke about his time in the army. There was Samuel, a freed slave who had moved west after the war to escape the violence of Reconstruction. And there was old Charlie, who had been driving cattle since before Adelaide was born. But it was Caleb who occupied most of her thoughts. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the easy competence with which he handled his work. He was patient with the younger cowboys, firm when necessary, and unfailingly kind to her. At night, when the others had gone to their bedrolls, he would sit with her by the fire and they would talk. Adelaide learned that he loved books but rarely had access to them. She learned that he played harmonica but was too shy to do so in front of the other men. She learned that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher, but that his father's death had ended that dream. He, in turn, learned about her life in Petaluma, the suffocating control of her father, the quiet desperation of knowing that her future had been decided without her input. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Caleb asked one night as they watched the stars wheel overhead. If money and propriety and everything else did not matter, Adelaide thought about this. No one had ever asked her such a question before. "I think I would like to run a boarding house," she said slowly. "Somewhere clean and safe where people could come and feel welcomed. I have always liked the idea of creating a home, but I would want it to be mine, not my husband's. Does that sound foolish?" "No," Caleb said. "It sounds perfect for you. You are good at making people feel comfortable. Even these rough cowboys have warmed to you, and that is no small feat." "They warmed to me because you made it clear they should," Adelaide said. "They follow your lead, Caleb. They respect you." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But respect has to be earned. You earned theirs by working hard and not complaining. That matters out here." As the second week began, Adelaide realized with a jolt that she did not want the drive to end. The thought of reaching Sacramento and parting ways with Caleb filled her with an ache she could not quite name. She told herself it was simply gratitude, that she was confusing her appreciation for his help with something deeper. But she knew, in her heart, that it was more than that. She had fallen in love with him. The realization came one evening as she watched him tend to his horse, his movements careful and gentle. She loved the way he treated everything with respect, from the animals to his fellow cowboys to her. She loved his quiet strength, the way he never raised his voice but still commanded attention. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth knowing, worth saving, worth caring about. But what could she possibly offer him? She had nothing. No money, no family, no prospects. She was a woman with a scandalous past who had been abandoned by her own father. What future could they possibly have together? That night, Adelaide lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars and trying not to cry. Caleb was keeping watch, sitting a little distance away from the fire. She could see his silhouette against the moonlight, steady and vigilant. She wanted to go to him, to tell him how she felt, but fear kept her frozen. The next morning, they crested a rise and saw Sacramento spread out in the valley below. The city was larger than Adelaide had imagined, a sprawling collection of buildings and streets that seemed to go on forever. She could see the river glinting in the sunlight and the smoke of countless chimneys rising into the sky. "We will reach the railhead by afternoon," Caleb said. "Once we sell the herd, I will help you find a place to stay." Adelaide nodded, not trusting her voice. This was it then, the end of their time together. She would thank him for his help, accept whatever money he insisted on giving her, and then she would be alone again. They drove the cattle to the stockyards on the edge of town, and Caleb negotiated with the buyer while the other cowboys kept the herd calm. Adelaide stayed back, watching the transaction from a distance. Money changed hands, papers were signed, and just like that, the drive was over. The cattle were herded into pens and the cowboys began collecting their wages. Caleb walked back to where Adelaide stood, holding a small leather pouch. "Your share," he said, offering it to her. "My share," Adelaide echoed, confused. "You worked on this drive just like the rest of us," Caleb said. "You cooked, you helped break camp, you never complained, you earned this." Adelaide opened the pouch and stared at the coins inside. It was more money than she had ever held in her life. "Caleb, I cannot take this. This is yours." "It is yours," he corrected. "I already have what I need. Take it, Adelaide. Use it to build that boarding house you talked about." Tears blurred her vision. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me, Caleb said softly. You just need to be happy, that is all I want. The other cowboys were mounting up, ready to head to the saloons and brothels that lined the streets near the stockyards. Charlie rode over to where they stood and tipped his hat to Adelaide. It was a pleasure, miss. You take care of yourself. Thank you, Charlie, Adelaide said, for everything. One by one, the others said their goodbyes and rode off. Soon, only Caleb remained. He stood there awkwardly, clearly struggling to find the right words. I should help you find a room, he said finally. Somewhere respectable. They walked into the city, leading Caleb's horse between them. The streets were crowded with people, and Adelaide felt overwhelmed by the noise and chaos after weeks in the wilderness. Caleb seemed to sense her discomfort and stayed close, his presence a steady anchor in the confusion. They found a boarding house run by a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson. Caleb negotiated a week's room and board for Adelaide, paying from his own pocket despite her protests. Mrs. Patterson showed Adelaide to a small but clean room on the second floor, and then discreetly left them alone. Well, Caleb said, looking around the room as if memorizing it. You are all set. You have money, you have a safe place to stay, and Mrs. Patterson can help you find work if you ask. Caleb, Adelaide said, her heart pounding, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. What is it? I do not want you to go. The words came out in a rush, raw and honest. I know I have no right to ask you to stay. I know you have your own life and your own obligations. But these past 2 weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I cannot bear the thought of never seeing you again. Caleb stared at her, and for a horrible moment, Adelaide thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then his expression softened, and he crossed the room in 2 strides. He took her hands in his grip warm and strong. Adelaide, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been trying to figure out how to say the same thing. I do not want to leave you. I have not wanted to leave you since the moment I found you in those mountains. But I did not think I had the right to say so. You have been through so much, and I did not want to pressure you into anything. You are not pressuring me, Adelaide said. I am telling you what I want. I want you to stay. I want us to build a life together if that is something you want too. It is everything I want, Caleb said. But Adelaide, you need to understand what you would be getting. I am just a cowboy. I do not have much to offer except my work and my word. We would have to build everything from nothing. I do not need much, Adelaide said. I just need you. Caleb pulled her into his arms then, holding her close. Adelaide rested her head against his chest and felt the steady beat of his heart. This was real. This was happening. She was choosing her own future, and she was choosing him. They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her buy, and Caleb wore his best shirt and a new vest. The ceremony was brief and practical, but when Caleb slipped a plain gold band onto Adelaide's finger and kissed her for the first time, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. They spent their wedding night in Adelaide's room at the boarding house, and for the first time in her life, Adelaide understood what it meant to be truly intimate with another person. Caleb was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable, and the connection they shared went far beyond the physical. It was a joining of 2 souls who had found each other against impossible odds. In the days that followed, they began to plan their future. Caleb found work at a ranch outside of Sacramento, and Adelaide took a job at a restaurant in town. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they would have enough to buy their own land. It was hard work, and there were times when Adelaide felt exhausted beyond measure, but she never regretted her choice. Being with Caleb, building a life with him, was worth every sacrifice. 6 months after their wedding, Caleb came home with news that changed everything. The owner of the ranch where he worked was selling off parcels of land, and one of them could be theirs if they could come up with the down payment. It was a small piece of property, only about 40 acres, but it had good water and enough grazing for a modest herd. They counted their savings and realized they were just short of what they needed. Adelaide felt despair creeping in, but Caleb refused to give up. He took on extra work, breaking horses for other ranchers, and Adelaide started taking in laundry in addition to her restaurant job. They pushed themselves to the limit, working from dawn until long after dark. Finally, on a cold November morning, they walked into the land office with enough money to make the purchase. The deed was drawn up and signed, and just like that, they were landowners. Adelaide cried as they walked out of the office, overwhelmed by the reality of what they had accomplished. They built their first house themselves, a small cabin with one room and a stone fireplace. It was not much, but it was theirs. Caleb worked the land while Adelaide turned the cabin into a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden. They bought 3 cows and a bull, the beginning of what they hoped would become a thriving herd. The first winter was difficult. Money was tight, and the work never seemed to end. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. On the coldest nights, they would sit by the fire and talk about their dreams. Caleb wanted to build a bigger house, something with separate rooms and a real kitchen. Adelaide wanted to start that boarding house she had talked about, once the ranch was stable enough to support it. Spring brought new life to the land and new hope to their hearts. The cows calved successfully, and Caleb was able to sell a few head for a good price. Adelaide discovered she was pregnant in early summer, and the joy on Caleb's face when she told him made her cry happy tears. Their son was born in February of 1880, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after the cowboy who had been so kind to Adelaide during the cattle drive. Caleb was a devoted father from the first moment, rocking Samuel to sleep at night and talking to him constantly, even though the baby could not yet understand. Life on the ranch was never easy, but it was good. They slowly built up their herd, and Caleb's reputation as a skilled rancher grew. Other homesteaders would come to him for advice, and he was always generous with his time and knowledge. Adelaide started taking in boarders, travelers who needed a place to stay for a night or two, and her cooking became well known in the area. She had not forgotten her dream of running a boarding house, and this was the beginning of making it real. When Samuel was 3, Adelaide gave birth to twin girls. They named them Emma and Grace, and suddenly the small cabin felt very crowded indeed. Caleb began building the bigger house he had always promised, working on it whenever he had spare time. It took 2 years to complete, but the result was worth the wait. The new house had 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor where Adelaide could entertain guests. She hung lace curtains in the windows and filled the rooms with furniture they had saved up to buy. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1885, they had over 100 head of cattle and had hired 2 hands to help with the work. Adelaide officially opened her boarding house, advertising in the Sacramento newspapers. She soon had a steady stream of guests, and the income helped stabilize their finances even more. Their family grew again with the birth of another son, whom they named Caleb Jr., and then a final daughter, Margaret. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running through the rooms and guests at the dinner table. It was everything Adelaide had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream. Through it all, her love for Caleb only deepened. He was her partner in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the decisions and the dreams. They still sat by the fire on cold nights and talked about the future, though now they also talked about the past, about the incredible journey that had brought them together. Adelaide never saw her father again. She heard, years later, that he had lost the store in Petaluma and moved away, though no one seemed to know where. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a distant sadness for what might have been. But she also felt grateful, in a strange way, because his cruelty had set her on the path that led to Caleb. As for Harold Brennan, the mine owner her father had tried to force her to marry, he died alone in his big house with no one to mourn him. Adelaide heard this news without any emotion at all. That life, the one her father had planned for her, felt like it had happened to someone else. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Adelaide with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with trusted friends and spent a week in the city, seeing plays and eating at fancy restaurants and acting like young lovers again. On their last night, as they walked along the waterfront watching the ships in the harbor, Caleb pulled Adelaide close and kissed her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The life we built. It is not easy and it is not fancy." "Never," Adelaide said firmly. "You saved my life, Caleb Winters, not just in those mountains but every day since. You gave me the chance to be myself, to build something that matters." "How could I ever regret that?" "I am the one who should be grateful," Caleb said. "You could have chosen anyone, Adelaide, but you chose me. That is the greatest gift I have ever received." They returned to the ranch renewed and ready to face whatever challenges came next. The children grew and eventually started families of their own. Samuel took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing the same skill and dedication his father had always displayed. Emma married a schoolteacher and moved to Sacramento, while Grace became a nurse. Young Caleb studied law and opened a practice in San Francisco, and Margaret surprised everyone by becoming a journalist, writing articles about women's rights and social reform. Adelaide continued to run the boarding house well into her 60s, only retiring when her arthritis made the work too difficult. Even then, she supervised from a comfortable chair in the kitchen, directing the younger women she had hired to help. The boarding house had become famous throughout Northern California, known for excellent food and warm hospitality. Caleb aged gracefully, his hair going silver but his strength remaining. He still worked the ranch every day, refusing to fully retire. He said the land had given him everything, and he owed it his labor in return. Adelaide would watch him from the porch, this man who had kept his promise to her so many years ago, and feel her heart swell with love. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house they had built rang with laughter and music, and Adelaide looked around at the gathered family with wonder. All of this had come from that moment in the mountains when a cowboy had found a desperate young woman and decided to help her. All of this had sprung from Caleb's simple conviction that fathers did not abandon their daughters, that everyone deserved kindness and care. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Adelaide and Caleb sat on their porch watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. The cattle were distant shapes in the golden light, and the smell of grass and earth filled the air. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, taking her hand in his. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Adelaide said. "I am thinking about that girl in the mountains who thought she was going to die, and how she could never have imagined all of this. I am thinking about you and how you changed everything." "We changed everything," Caleb corrected gently. "You are the one who had the courage to start over, to build a new life from nothing. I just helped a little." "You did more than help," Adelaide said. "You loved me when I had nothing to offer. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself." You gave me a home and a family and a life worth living." Caleb brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars they had watched together during that cattle drive so many years ago. The journey from those dark mountains to this peaceful porch had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. Adelaide had learned that fathers might fail, that the people who were supposed to love you might betray you, but that did not mean love itself was a lie. True love existed, the kind that saw you at your worst and chose to stay, the kind that built something beautiful from broken pieces. Years later, when Adelaide was in her 70s and Caleb in his 80s, they would still sit on that porch together. Their bodies were frailer now, and they moved more slowly, but the love between them had never dimmed. They had weathered every storm together, from droughts that threatened the ranch to illnesses that scared them both. They had buried friends and celebrated births, and supported each other through every joy and sorrow. On a warm spring morning in 1918, Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep, Adelaide's hand in his. She grieved deeply, but she also felt grateful for the 40 years they had shared. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, until she joined him 3 years later. They were buried together on a hill overlooking their land, under a spreading oak tree they had planted when Samuel was born. The headstone was simple, bearing only their names and dates, but the legacy they left behind was anything but simple. They had built a family and a home from nothing. They had proved that love could triumph over cruelty, that kindness was stronger than hate, that broken people could heal each other and create something beautiful. Their children and grandchildren would tell the story for generations. How Adelaide had been thrown away in the mountains, how Caleb had found her and said those words that changed everything, how they had fallen in love and built an empire of love and land together. It became a family legend, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could find you. That sometimes salvation came riding out of the wilderness on a bay horse, wearing a dusty hat and carrying a good heart. The ranch still stands today, run by the descendants of Adelaide and Caleb Winters. The original cabin has been preserved as a museum of sorts, and the bigger house is still occupied by family members. The boarding house operates as a bed and breakfast now, welcoming travelers just as Adelaide once did. And on that hill overlooking the valley, under the spreading oak tree, 2 headstones stand side by side, marking the resting place of a cowboy and the woman he saved, who saved him right back. Their story became a testament to the power of choosing your own life, of refusing to accept the cruelty others tried to impose, of believing that you deserved better, even when everyone else said you did not. Adelaide had been thrown into the mountains to die, but she had climbed out of that darkness and into the light. And Caleb had been the one to extend his hand and help her up, not because he had to, not because he expected anything in return, but simply because it was right. In the end, that was the lesson their lives taught, that being good matters, that showing up for each other matters, that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day. They made that choice for 40 years, and the ripples of that decision spread out through time, touching hundreds of lives, creating a legacy that would never be forgotten. The mountains where Adelaide was abandoned still stand, their peaks crowned with snow. Sometimes, when the light hits them just right at sunset, they seem to glow with a gentle warmth, as if the land itself remembers the girl who nearly died there and the cowboy who refused to let that happen. As if the wilderness itself bears witness to the love story that began in darkness and ended in light, the kind of love that transforms not just 2 people, but everyone they touch. And perhaps that is the truest happy ending of all. Not just that Adelaide and Caleb found each other and built a beautiful life together, but that their love created something that would outlast them both. A family and a home where kindness was the rule and everyone knew they were valued and cherished. Where no one would ever be thrown away. Where fathers protected their daughters instead of abandoning them. Where love was measured not in grand gestures but in daily choices to show up and do the work and keep the promises you made. That is the legacy Adelaide Sutherland and Caleb Winters left behind, carved not in stone but in the hearts of everyone who came after them, a legacy that whispers still across the California hills. You are worthy of love. You deserve kindness. You can survive anything as long as you remember your own worth. And sometimes, when you least expect it, someone will come along who sees that worth and helps you see it too. And together you will build something that lasts forever.